Welcome to Machine Minds, where technology and humanity meet. I'm your host, Greg Terrusian, founder of Samson Rose, a recruiting and search business focused on the robotics and AI industries. The Machine Minds show is where we dive deep into the intricate world of robotics and artificial intelligence. As a staffing industry leader with a passion for the frontiers of technology, I'm pleased to be bringing you intimate conversations with the founders, investors, and trailblazers who are at the heart of the AI and robotics revolution. In each episode, we dig into their journeys, the applications of the products they're working on, and the breakthroughs that are shaping our future. Join us as we explore how these machine minds are transforming the way we live, work, and understand our world. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a tech enthusiast, or just curious about this amazing field, you'll learn something new with each episode. Let's delve into the extraordinary. Let's delve into machine minds. Hello and welcome to Machine Minds. I'm your host, Greg Terrusian, founder of Samson Rose, your robotics talent search partner. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Paul Manwell, founder and CEO of TC Labs. Thanks for being on the show today, Paul.
Thank you, Greg. It's exciting to have this conversation.
I'm excited as well. Let's jump into it. So can you first start by walking us through your early career? You know, you've had a really impressive background, and from consulting to your time at Google. I'd love for the audience to get like the lay of the land there before we jump into everything.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's been an interesting journey. I grew up in New York, which is something that if you're a New Yorker, you believe that anyone living anywhere else is in some sense just kidding. But then couldn't deal with New York winter, so went to Rice for undergrad and studied mechanical engineering. And as a mechanical engineer, when you live in Houston, you go to Rice, you work in the oil field. So I actually worked in the oil field for my summer career, as well as early on, both in upstream, as well as in refining and midstream pipelining. So kind of had that background. And then after that, moved into consulting, mostly because I was in my 20s and wanted to travel. And so 75 passport stamps later, got an MBA, and then eventually moved to the Bay Area to work on a startup.
Awesome. And then you had pretty like high profile roles as well through your career and obviously your time at Google and everything. I don't know how much of that you want to share, but I'm curious about how the consulting journey and then your time there kind of helped shape your entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot that everyone is the product of all their experience. And I landed at Google because a business school classmate of mine was on Nikesh Arora's global sales strategy team. And Nikesh had just moved from Europe to take over global sales, and that team was scaling up. And so it was a great opportunity. My friend actually harassed me. I was running a startup, but it was 2009, so things were slowing down in the world. And he harassed me. I don't even know how many times he emailed me before he eventually added my then girlfriend, now wife, to the email chain to harass me even more, to then apply to Google. And so I wound up landing at Google on Nikesh's team. My friend promptly quit and joined a large venture capital firm 2 weeks after I started. And then I worked for Nikesh, which is amazing to see how someone of his thoughtfulness and ability to understand how large scale operations can be run, and how you motivate and how you create the right lanes and how do you create focus and attention to detail around metrics. And then while I was working for Nikesh, I met Sundar Pichai, and then took a role working as Sundar's chief of staff for 6 years. And that was just an incredible experience. First of all, seeing Sundar's leadership up close and seeing how he could see the whole picture, but then bring his leadership team along on the journey through discussion and not pushing on folks. It was a very open, discursive, and intellectually challenging. But then seeing amazing leaders like Hiroshi Lockheimer or John Giandrea up close, Linus Upson, some really incredible people that all had very different leadership styles and led these very specific outcomes that are global scale. Kind of, teaches a very different way to think about how you motivate, but then also how do you think about the problem in its entirety. The Google founders were really impressive. One of the things that they would always beat in is, building something 10x is actually easier a lot of the time than only growing at 10%. And part of the reason is you actually think about the problem very differently. When you think 10%, you look at incremental gains and you don't reframe a lot of these problems. And bigger opportunities, better people often want to chase the big gnarly problem, and then you question your priors all the time, and you can actually get to a really great outcome.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds like a amazing rotational program and crash course, like being right hand in hand almost with these people and seeing how they do it, like another MBA almost in the professional world.
I mean, it was another gear, right? MBAs are often really about the relationships you get, and then the knowledge is second order. And then this was seeing very practical terms, how people led through sticky situations, sticky human-wise, policy-wise, product-wise. The Google operates at a scale and complexity that is really impressive, and so the challenges are often not easy. The only a lot of times some of the only wrong answer is the misaligned one, where you have two choices that could go one way or the other, and being able to bring the team along to attack the problem holistically and then pivot together. That's when you can be successful. If you have those cracks in the organization, you wind up being confused and not able to execute.
No, that makes sense. Solid foundation then. Consulting, MBA, Google, all of that must have prepared you really well for this role and this entrepreneurial journey. I want to dive into more of TC Labs now. And can you tell us about the founding story and what inspired you to take that leap to actually start your own company after a really healthy career, it sounds like, at Google?
So the climate challenge isn't going away anytime soon, and it only continues to get to be a bigger problem. I actually wrote my business school essay multiple years ago on being able to address different parts of the climate challenge, and so I'd always been kind of looking for a Paul-shaped opportunity to make an impact. And to date, it just took a long time to be able to figure out where the issues were. And it was actually during my paternity leave that I got a chance to take a step back and think a little bit more creatively about the opportunity. And so the TC Labs founding story has its kernels there, but like any good kernel story, paternity leave ended, you're still at work, but the problem followed me. And so kind of chewing over that idea, finding ways to actually address it. And the idea was taking a lot of the large scale analytics tools, because I led analytics and growth for Google at a platform level and did a bunch of developer at a platform level through Google. Applying that to the data that I knew existed in large scale industry. And that kind of sat there and it incubated, and then, started poking around, trying to figure out. And at Google, there's a lot of opportunities that, can be available within the walls of the company, because there's a lot of different ways to go. But this problem still never was really like Google shaped. It was a little bit too low in the stack of a factory, a little bit too specific, not global platform. Needed a go-to-market that wouldn't, definitely wasn't an ads go-to-market and wasn't really a cloud go-to-market. And so when you start doing those exclusionary processes, you realize that, if you believe that this thing should be solved and you believe that I have the ability to solve it, but then you see that there's the only way to really solve it was to actually build a go-to-market that was fundamentally different than the one that would be available. Then it becomes a question of, okay, actually need to start a company to do that. Because then you can anchor it around the problem itself and build in a very first principles way towards this particular problem.
Interesting. It makes sense that that's the clear direction to go and the motivation to start from scratch. What were what have been some of these early challenges starting TC Labs? What have you faced and how have you kind of navigated them as a first-time entrepreneur?
So I'm a second time. I did do a startup, so before Google. So some of those things, now I'm making new mistakes, which is great. There's a lot of things that are just hard. And I think it's funny because you follow in LinkedIn, either people are like, everything is awesome, I'm so amazing, or embrace the suck. And just I'm just slogging your way through. And how do you find the right balance between those two ends of the continuum? I think there's a lot of it that is really difficult, especially early customers, because they don't have any anchor on why you exist or what you can do for them. And we are building mission critical software for large scale industrial facilities that use between 1200 degrees and 2400 degrees centigrade heat. So the bar of quality is very high. And so having a lot of folks are not prone to be like, yeah, sure. Hey, Paul in a garage, come by. Right. And so some of what we had to do was understand the problem deeply, get in front of the right set of customers, iterate quickly with them. And then continue to make progress forward, because that's kind of what you need to do when you're a startup entrepreneur. And so I think the different things that were useful, having built platforms internal to Google that all of Google and then, by extension, majority of our user base used, and done many of them. I built notifications, or built our different tools within the developer ecosystem. I helped turn around GMS Core or the Google Play services. Those are large scale, complex operations. And so being able to kind of make progress and know that every day you're better than the last is a really important thing. But then figuring out how to get to the right set of customers and good customers, because not every customer is a good one. And being able to evaluate why that partnership will be good and whether or not they help you build your platform towards what the next iteration is. Are they thinking about the problem in the right way? There was at Google, I worked with an engineering counterpart, Chris Sadler, who is amazing. Kind of one of the cornerstones of the Gmail team for many years. Has now moved on to one of the other big tech companies. He was always he was a great platform customer to work with, because he had a really high bar, but he told you why it was a high bar, and he wasn't kind of playing around. It wasn't political. It was actually like objectively trying to do what was best for his service and for their users. And if you met that bar, he would work with you. And it was clear, and the goalpost never moved. He was very crisp about it. And those outcomes, I knew that by working with him, we could build a better tool. So we would go to him with things, but we knew we had to hit a bar to get to the first conversation. And then we knew that we would get better afterwards. And so those are the classes of customers that we're looking for, who are looking to improve their operations, are going to give us great feedback, are going to really beat on the product in a productive way. But finding them is hard, and you have to sift through a lot of noise. And so that's the hard thing as a startup entrepreneur.
I think that's a good point to kind of like reiterate, because we hear it a lot on the show about, customer first, speak to your customers, what do they need instead of building in a vacuum, etc. But then the other side is like good customers, who's going to help you achieve what you want to achieve, because it's not just one-sided, right? You might be building something completely different for one type of customer if you go down that route, just what they need. But if you have a vision, and then you can find the customers that are going to match the vision, but then also help you excel and help you succeed and give you the feedback and then the scale. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Totally. And you see there are a lot of companies out there that work with whoever will buy.
Yeah.
And then they have like 3 or 4 different competing sets of requirements, and you can feel that in the product.
Right. Yeah, it's very true. You have to move forward intentionally and then find those customers to align to it. Yeah. Should have asked before, and we'll kind of take this step back just again to share with the audience, but if you can give us an overview of TC Labs, because I know you have a huge goal of reducing carbon through various types of technology, IoT, big data, machine learning, etc. We were talking a bit offline about some of the new technology and stuff you're looking at, but if you could give us like the elevator pitch, then jump into the tech, that would be great.
So stepping really far back, when you look at that outcome of a large scale impact on climate goals, roughly 25% of global emissions comes from industrial emissions, 25 to 30%. But and a lot of times when people think industry, they think, oh, it's a car manufacturer, or it's electronics manufacturer. Those, funnily enough, in the actual like Tesla plant or the Samsung plant, from an emissions perspective, they're pretty minimal. Robots use remarkably little energy on a relative basis compared to the primary ingredients that you're putting into those machines. So the steel and cement that we use to make our homes is incredibly impactful on global emissions. The plastics and plastic byproducts, so petroleum-based byproducts that we use in just about everything in our daily lives. The microphone that you have, the laptop that we're using, most of the clothing that we're wearing has a lot of plastics in it and petroleum-based products, the shoes, etc. Making that, the refineries are 3% of global emissions. Steel is something like 7 or 8%. Cement is, a handful. And those wind up being very small factories, actually. So they're large scale, large heat plants that operate in most of the world. And you probably don't see them that frequently because not many people, especially people on this podcast, likely live near those places because they're often removed from urban environments. So we took that as a problem statement, and we knew that large scale continuous flow based systems, there was a fair amount of inefficiency in the way that they actually operate today, because there's lots of complexity in those problems. When you think about modern refining, there's all sorts of different opportunities for end products, from the plastic, petroleum-based plastics products to unleaded gasoline, jet fuel, etc. But there's also a wide range of crude inputs, and so being able to kind of manage that through ambient temperatures make a big difference in operations. Chiller performance is affected something like 14% of their brains. So all of those things, plus then the fact that a lot of the operators, that those staffs aren't always full strength. They've been hollowed out with reorganizations. Those staffs are also aging. So the folks that are actually on the front line running these critical pieces of infrastructure are often kind of towards the end of their career. And to be honest, there's so much complexity in these plant environments that those operators rely on the knowledge of things that they've seen over the years that worked. In one of these operator guides, it was like, when this goes wrong, call Greg. And we were like, it's not a very durable operating procedure. And so you start with that as a thesis statement, and then you work your way backwards, right? You work your way towards how do we make these plants more operationally sound? And we come from a very data-rich environment. And so our operating thesis was always, how do we improve the data from these plants such that decision-making can be higher quality, faster, in the moment, and able to deal with the heterogeneity of the plant environment. And so we built a set of tools that the best analog is Google Analytics, but not the sort of user layer of Google Analytics, the data layer of Google Analytics that can go into any type of application and make sense of it. And so we've built tools that go and understand the data of any kind of plant, turn it into meaningful structures around the boilers, the ovens, the distillation columns, the casting machines, and then use that to drive a series of analytical operations. And those analytical operations are the things that are needed to help those operators perform better. We can ingest the data from a refinery in like 5 days and get that to be a meaningful experience. So it's super quick. And it's because we took that thesis of how do you use artificial intelligence, do kind of what we did at Google around indexing the web or indexing YouTube videos or any of those like unstructured data sets you can turn into structured data sets, and then like manage the schema. A lot of industrial operations inherit schema of the way it existed. And so you have these people are building modern data stacks based on some decision somebody made 40 years ago on how to name ABC sensor when they installed it. Like, that's insane, right? Like, there's no scalability available in that. And so you have to assert like other types of things on the back of it. And so once we do that, then we have the ability to have the statistical data off the back of the environment. But then you can take a lot of unstructured data. There's a ton of unstructured data that's really, really interesting around operators manuals, guides. And with the evolution of foundational models from Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, companies like that, you can take those, like the large language models, to make sense of the different reasoning flows, and then be able to take the structured data and say, hey, we saw this happening in this part of your hydrogen desulfurization unit. Maybe look and see whether or not it's this valve that is stuck, and that's what's driving this departure in your data. And by doing that, we can generate hypotheses using the unstructured data and foundational models. We can generate tests for those hypotheses. And we can walk users through that journey in a way that it mirrors what that process engineer would have done when they showed up in the morning. And we basically take a 6-hour exercise and turn it into 5 minutes.
That's hugely impactful. That's huge. So how many customers, or are you deployed with any customers right now?
So we're deployed, but we're working very deliberately through, these early customers, kind of back to the whole customer story. When you, one of the problems that I probably made in my early entrepreneur life, but then things that I learned when I was building platforms at Google, finding the right first customers and the right mix. So we have refinery customers we're working with that, let us go deep. We have a couple of other customers that we work with in the chemical sector or in the food sector that allow us to practice going from one plant to the next and dealing with like lower quality data environments. And so what we're doing is building out the system with a bunch of those edge cases with customers that are nicely, that provide a good tension and working tension. So you can build the platform to quality and then start rolling it out at scale. Because if you go too soon, you wind up in a world where you haven't ironed out all those use cases. And then suddenly you start throwing humans at it because you raise VC funding. And then those humans have to justify their job And then they suddenly have organizations that are around data cleanup and data ingestion, when in fact you probably should have built tools to make that go away instead. But it's harder to do that once you've assigned a human that job. So we're going to iron those edges off over the next sort of 5 to 6 months, and then look to really amp it up over time.
Amazing. At this stage, while you're doing these initial customers and stuff like that, how do you measure success? Is it a feedback from them, or do you know the direction you want to go already and kind of like iron that out ahead of time?
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely a bit of both. So having built platforms before, we kind of know what platform success looks like. We have a rough idea of what classes of problems we want to be solving. Are we saving meaningful, are we creating meaningful value for our customers? And there's a handful of dimensions that we know that around, improving plant profitability on the top line, because we can allow them to take advantage of new opportunities, reducing costs. Are we able to highlight safety issues or maintenance issues, which both reduce costs and improve overall plant visibility? So getting those right is important. But then there's a bit of a taste level of is this a delightful product? Would I use it myself? And knowing, oh wait, this actually is useful. And it's not just because we built it. It's because it answers this particular question. If I was to empathize with this user, this would actually be something that I would use, and not get stuck and not be like, oh, this is awful. I hate you for making me figure out what this inscrutable data field name from 40 years ago is.
It's interesting. Yeah, it makes sense. So let's talk more about your team. You also mentioned investors. I want to get to that just high level as well. But your team, it includes some top talent, many with also impressive backgrounds. How do you approach building teams, or the right team? And why is it crucial for a company like you at this stage?
I mean, it's a trope, but it's a trope for a reason. Software is an intellectual property business. And so the value of your company is entirely based on the value of the humans that you have in the door. And so, but getting the right mix is very, very difficult, because you can hire people and then have them be great people, but wrong for your timing, wrong for the problem you have. They can be wrong for a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with the human themselves. And that's a challenge, right, as a leader, because you objectively, something should work, but it's not. But you have to kind of look a couple layers below and be able to know who's coming on board and why. And so part of what, Aaron and I look for is, the mix of humans that solve a bunch of the problems that we have. We are solving an analytics problem using AI, but for production engineering, right? Large scale, process engineering. So we need folks that can kind of play a lot of those roles. So, one of our early hires is a back-end engineer that grew up around cement industry. So understands how process engineering works. One of our designer worked that grew up basically in the metals industry because of family connections. Our sales folks are from the energy industry and have worked 30 plus years in the majors and in other parts of midstream, upstream, and downstream. Another one of our engineers has a chemical engineering undergrad and a master's in computer science. And so we're trying to make sure that we are, whilst we focus on getting folks that are great in their particular trade, great designers, great analysts, great AI folks, they also need to kind of understand our user with a certain amount of empathy and be able to solve some of those problems and not be confused when we talk about thermodynamics. And so that, but then, there's a lot of times where we have folks that are on the edges where we could hire them, but choose not to for different reasons. Sometimes just, they'd be right for us in 6 months or 12 months. We're not big enough yet. We don't have the classes of problems that they would be able to solve. We don't need TLs. We don't, we PM it. And my co-founder and I PM, right? You don't need that person. You don't need an ops person yet because we don't have ops problems yet. And if you hire those people ahead of when you need them, you actually get yourself into trouble. But some of that also comes from the fact that my co-founder and I we're very versatile, right? I've led ops teams, I've led product teams. And so being able to do both helps because we at least acknowledge when we're making mistakes and we know what good looks like when we're sinning.
Love that. I'm glad you said a lot of that as well, because it's obviously something that I focus on the talent side, helping hire the right people. And I sometimes sound like a stuck record talking to founders, or even on this show, talking about the right people for the right time in your company. And then, as you mentioned, the right problem as well, because they could be great engineers, they could be great salespeople, but if they don't get what you're building or that industry or that way of working, it can be detrimental. But then another part that you mentioned is hiring them too soon. And you do get yourself in trouble. Multiple reasons, right? I talk about opportunistic hiring. Sometimes people are just oh, this is a great person, we want to hire them because when are we going to get this opportunity again? But you bring someone in too early and you don't have the right work for them, just creates a bad candidate experience, creates attrition. You've wasted a ton of money, time and effort, and then they're not going to come back to you when you now have the work. They're off to the next thing. So you have to be mindful, have to be intentional, and the versatility is key in startup. Even if it's not you as a founder, but you're hiring a versatile team, people that can do multiple things and you can juggle at that early stage. But when the problems are there and when you have something that needs to be solved and owned, don't be afraid to hire the person for it, delegate it and move on, and then build in that way, but don't do it too soon.
Totally. And there's some roles that in particular you can really get yourself into trouble by hiring too early. I think management roles are one of them because if you actually don't have enough things to be managed and that person is only working only really has 20% of their time they should be working. Yeah. If they can't go out and sell, if they can't go out and do something else, they wind up creating work, and that actually creates work for the whole organization.
Interesting.
And I think marketing also, if you hire marketing too early, you can have someone who's a great marketer and generates all the right, great demand that you are not ready for.
Yeah.
And then you wind up chasing a whole bunch of leads that actually have nothing to do with the product you've built at that point.
Yeah.
Especially in the B2B space. And so you suddenly are getting pulled in a bunch of different directions. And if you can't chart your way through that problem, you have a lot of debt that you're going to have to eat.
It's true.
So
yeah,
hiring those roles too early can be really, really detrimental.
That's true. I've also seen it on the marketing side where there's founders or an incentive from the board and investor side to push more demand, and you start marketing and promising things that the tech can't do with timelines that don't match up, and then you end up with this battle and heads bumping with engineering and product and marketing and sales. So you definitely have to balance that correctly.
And it's the right tension, right? If you manage it correctly. But if you get too far over your skis and suddenly in order to be able to meet the market where it is, you're selling something that is nowhere near the roadmap.
Yeah.
You're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. True.
And then you sin. The sins in your technical stack, and those are hard to overcome.
Yeah. It's good points. Yeah, definitely stuff that people should take note of. On the investment side, you guys have secured some really reputable investors, and you and the team are obviously known in the tech space from your backgrounds and stuff like that. How did you attract, we're not going to go into exactly who, but it's, people who are very well known in certain companies and things like that in the space. But how did you attract them, and what role have they played so far? Or what are you looking, I guess, for your investors to play as a role? Is it insight, board membership, introductions, or is it just having reputable people who back your product with finance?
I think it's a bunch of things. The thing that's great, so we have a lot of the investors are folks that we've worked, is truly like a friends and family around. So folks that we've worked with and believe in us. And so those early rounds, getting, especially when things are confusing as you work through product market fit, having having great people that are willing to support you and kind of talk through things and have a good perspective is invaluable. But then also having those investors, have credibility as you go to your early customers and can kind of establish some credibility on your behalf, helps a lot as well. Given kind of where I came from and the classes of customers that we're chasing, our investors are not able to offer as many door opening opportunities because there's not a lot of like Apple and Google people that know, chemical plant GMs. So that it's just the worlds don't really collide, but that's actually, that's part of what we're trying to do. When I started this company, I reached out to one of my lab partners from undergrad, who's a pretty senior person over at Exxon, and his exact quote was, "We don't have enough people like you talking to enough people like me to bridge the divide." And that issue has come up because, and something we saw at Google, the pace of technological innovation is so crazy that if you missed one technological leap, you're behind, and it's hard to then bring the latest onto your stack. And a lot of these businesses, because the nature of the asset life cycle makes it hard to kind of catch up to some of the lower levels of the stack. They're at a different place. And so being able to have investors that are knowledgeable about that and understand what that ecosystem is, and then understand kind of how to bridge technology and talk it through, and then also care about our eventual outcome and care about us as founders, it's been really, really valuable to us as we get through these early innings.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. Let's talk about the industry and future trends before we start gearing towards you guys and your future. But the climate tech space, it's evolving rapidly. What trends are you most excited by, and are there any where you think the industry is falling short right now?
So it's interesting. I actually see ourselves much more as an AI and analytics company that is addressing a climate challenge. Because climate tech is hard. It's a zillion things, everything from like fusion energy and like energy storage, and then us, right? And so, or transportation, mode of transportation, and alternative fuels. And so that the whole sector is so broad. I almost focus on the technology vertical as a thing that so I can probably speak a little more intelligently about AI. I think the thing that's been great about climate tech is people care now, right? Like I think in the first climate tech 1.0, it was like one class of problems, and I think it was a smaller set of people throwing their attention against it and throwing the money against it. I think this new iteration, it's touching a lot more issues. They're a lot more nuanced. There's been a lot of really interesting innovations that are really moving the sector forward. Val Miflikov, who is building alternative propulsion for jets or for aviation. That's such an important problem, and you probably wouldn't have gotten the same attention. Like he started the company maybe 8 years ago, and now it's really getting its legs. It's really impressive that we're moving there. I think on the AI side, we really are at a foundational, like a tipping point, similar to mobile in like 2010, similar to the web in 2001. Like I think we're kind of getting out of the place where all the investment in the platforms, like there's still an arms race around the next great model. That's great. But the number of things you can do with the next great model that is fundamentally different than what we could do 2 or 3 years ago is crazy. And so we're approaching a state where, the Instagram, the Ubers of the world, the companies that were built because they were mobile centric and use the properties of the platform differently, that's becoming like, we're going to see those companies start to get built now. And that's exciting. There'll be a lot of investment in the foundational models, but now as a result, like we can do so much iteration on like how our product works, how our team velocity works. It's fundamentally different than 5 years ago and what's possible. And so that's really exciting.
That is, yeah. I hadn't thought about it like that. Yeah. There's often a debate about whether tech companies truly prioritize sustainability or if it's more like about optics or, a whole bunch of other stuff. What's your take on this, seeing it from both sides?
I think my general take is the tech companies don't have a sustainability problem. And so they can say anything they want at an optics level. When you look at the actual data around where emissions are, even with like data center growth and everything, it's still minimal compared to like your local refinery. So it's a change, and so people like talk about the change. There's definitely parts. There's definitely parts that are, things like Amazon delivery trucks versus like large scale drop shipment. Like, I guess that's a problem that folks need to work through, but Amazon's been working on it. And like large scale data center energy demand, like puts a lot of stress on local grids, but it's still not quite like, think about everything else that we do in the world. Right. So I think it's good for the press. It makes everyone focus on sort of the ivory tower technology companies, but the problem still is like it takes a lot of steel and cement to build homes for all the people that want to move into new high rises, because the world is like fundamental levels of consumption are going up as people move up the economic ladder. And those particular modes of operation are still very antiquated. We haven't moved into a post-industrialist world of like consumption patterns. And so we can't actually build things the same way we built them 50 years ago. It's not feasible when, 1, 2, 3 billion more people want a fundamentally different quality of life. And they should have it. We just don't know how to
provide that,
build for it in a way that doesn't break the ecosystem that we have.
Interesting. Okay. Well, look, thank you for that. Before we get to wrap, can you share what's next for TC Labs? Are there any upcoming projects or anything that you can share that you're particularly excited about that's on the horizon?
I mean, as I mentioned, we're super excited. Things are really starting to get moving quickly. We're going to stay stealth for the next 3-4 months with a handful of those customers, really polishing the product and making it a great experience so that onboarding is super seamless. We can bring any type of plant on in a matter of weeks and then give them meaningful insights and opportunities to improve the quality and safety of their operations, to save their operators time, multiply their process engineering tenfold, and then overall like reduce costs and optimization. So I think kind of end of this year, you'll be hearing a lot more from us. It won't be called TC Labs at that point. We'll move to a new, Labs is a very stealth brand. So we'll rebrand. We have Alan Eagle helping, like the Google network people that worked on big projects will be helping us with the rebrand. And so kind of coming into January, you'll be hearing from me with a different name, and we'll be able to light up and help a lot of new facilities.
Love that. Well, we might have to get you back on here after the coming out of stealth and the rebrand and everything at some point next year to hear about all your progress.
It'll be fun.
Yeah. Well, where can our listeners learn more about TC Labs or keep an eye out on future developments and also connect with you?
Connect with me on LinkedIn is easiest. And then, because we're basically, as I mentioned, we're focused on the things we can do. So actually our marketing is pretty limited, and that's almost intentional.
Good. Okay. Good to know. Well, look, thank you again for being on the show, Paul. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this coming out and seeing all the things you guys do in the next few months.
Cool. Greg, I really appreciate it. This is awesome. I think this is such an important community to kind of keep moving forward, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that.
Cool. Cheers.
Bye.